Good morning. Welcome to Scottsdale 360, a virtual learning series focusing on the people, policies, and programs that shape our city government and the community we serve. Hi, I'm Christy Hill, your host today, as we learn about government relations and get to know Dale Wiebusch, our Government Relations Director for Scottsdale. Today, we'll learn how Dale advocates for Scottsdale's position on issues before the U.S. Congress, the state legislature, and regional governing boards. In addition to that, he will share how he keeps our mayor and council, as well as city manager and city management, abreast of the complex intergovernmental issues impacting Scottsdale. And before we get started, Dale, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and then go ahead and do your presentation?
Thank you very much, Christy. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today. I have been involved in government relations work for a little over 20 years, both in Minnesota and mostly here in Arizona. Prior to coming to the city of Scottsdale, I was the legislative affairs director down in the city of Maricopa for about 5 years. And before that, I was at the League of Cities and Towns for about a decade. Just to go a little bit further back, I was also the legislative director for the Domestic Violence Coalition for 3 years. So I've been around this world for a while. It's always intriguing. I still have the energy to do it, and I still get a great delight in representing the people that I work for. And I believe very strongly in local government. When I was a child in Moorhead, Minnesota, one of my best friend's dads was the mayor. And I used to listen to Mr. Stordahl negotiating the price of 8-inch pipe. I was about 9 years old at that time. So it's been in my blood for many, many, many years. So today, what I want to do is I want to run you through, as Christy said, sort of some of the processes that we go through, and then how we implement those ideas that are born from discussions that citizens have with staff, with council, with mayor, and the input that we receive, and then how we translate that into effective action on behalf of the city itself. So without further ado, I'm going to go through some of the slides. I chose this background in particular because there's both some hope and there's some anguish there. And that's kind of what the government relations world is about. It's a combination of striving to do something better and understanding that there are always going to be some opposing forces. So the mayor and the council in cities and towns across Arizona are the ones that implement policies, establish policies, excuse me. The city manager in most cases is the office that's responsible for the implementation of that policy. We do have a little bit unique situation here in Scottsdale that we have 6 charter officers. Most cities and towns only have 1 or 2, but Scottsdale is always kind of unique, I guess. We craft with input from a variety of sources the legislative agenda, which we adhere to here in our department, and any legislation that's introduced, we compare it to the legislative agenda to see if there is action necessary on our part. Within the legislative agenda, there are some core principles. First one being that we're going to respect the unique character and culture of the city. We also want to preserve local funding, and I'm going to get into some of those details in a little bit later on, as well as the last one, the preemption of local authority. Arizona has a unique system of sharing revenue. The state shares income tax and sales tax and vehicle license tax and gas tax with cities and towns, in lieu of cities and towns not having their own of those specific items. Those were citizen initiatives in some cases, some of those were statutory. The income tax shared revenue, for example, was established by a citizen initiative in 1972. So we receive 15% of all state collected income tax as cities and towns, and then it's distributed by population. The preemption of local authority, like I said, I've been at this for a while. Every year there are more than a handful I'm not sure what's between a handful and a ton, but it's somewhere in there, where we have a tax on local authority. Could be a tax on zoning, could be a tax on our ability to utilize the funding that we receive either through the state system or also our local tax collections. These slides are a little bit busier, but this is some of the key positions of the legislative agenda that was crafted and approved by council last year. We want to focus, we wanted to, excuse me, and we did focus very strongly on the problems associated with short-term rentals. In 2016, there was a bill that prohibited cities and towns from banning short-term rentals and also greatly restricted any abilities to regulate those. We have seen in this city, and we've seen in some other cities across the state, the negative impacts of that industry. It was sort of touted as a mom and pop operation, empty nesters running on a room, which I remember as being beds and breakfasts back in the day, to a real industry. And so we'll talk about a bill in particular a little bit later on that addressed this issue in particular. We also wanted to have some easier access to water infrastructure financing. Convoluted law in Arizona related to water. As you all know, water is a very sensitive topic right now with Colorado River issues and the drought. But there were some pieces in statute that we wanted to address that would allow us to have more opportunities to access federal funding. And we had to get some changes to state law to be able to do that. And again, we were successful there. Zoning authority, residential areas, I mentioned before, there's always some attacks on local authority. There are often what happens is that someone feels aggrieved by a process that occurred in the city or town. It could be any city or town. They find an ear of a legislator. The legislator introduces a bill to go after that particular issue, even though it might be best resolved, and often is best resolved by a simple conversation between that citizen and people within the city itself. I can't think of any, in my experience, situations where we were able to work with the particular city or town back when I worked at the League, for example, or when I worked in Maricopa or here in Scottsdale, where some conversations and understanding mutual agreements on things, and we resolved the issues without a piece of legislation. And when we get to bills introduced and bills passed, you'll understand this a little bit more as well. I talked a little bit about shared revenue systems. We get 15% of the state collected income tax. We also get, I can't remember the precise, it's 27 point something % of the sales tax revenues collected by the state. The state sales tax is 5.6%, I believe, and then we are able to put some on top of that. Scottsdale is one of the lowest individual city sales tax in the state at 1.75. And then the last one, opposed mandate, that's the unfunded mandate question. You shall do this, but there's not going to be any money associated with it. And we all have examples of that, I think, from both the state level and the federal level. And then our general topics of focus, we want to pay attention to bills that are advancing economic vitality and tourism, local government finance, ways that we can actually make systems smoother. And the smoother we can make systems, the better off it is for the citizen. And every time I look at a bill, I go, how will this make the lives of the citizens of this city better? It's my core principle. Transportation, be it infrastructure improvements, design improvements, whatever they may be. Neighborhoods, quality of life, social issues. I think that goes back to the Airbnb question, the STR question, short-term rental, excuse me, question. Enhancements to public safety, environmental planning, preservation, and water services and facilities. Scottsdale has a very good reputation for all of those areas, and we want to keep it that way. I originally thought I was going to do this comparison between what the job is supposed to be and what the job is. And then I looked actually, I hadn't looked at my job description, quite frankly, since I applied for this job. And so I went back into it. It's pages long, and I thought that would be awful to put on the whole slide. But if you want to access it, there is a link there in this slide that will demonstrate all the different pieces that this position pays attention to. And now I'll tell you what the job is. So one of the questions that was posed to me in preparation for this today was, what's the difference between government relations and lobbying? And I can kind of split my job into those two parts. Government relations is, it could almost be intergovernmental relations, because we deal with governments across the state, within the county, neighbor to neighbor, and those relationships, be it to a neighboring city or tribe, are all about open communication and dialogue. Let's talk about what our issues are. Let's come up with solutions. We have common goals. We collaborate with each other. In lobbying, and if you're not familiar, the word lobbying actually comes from people like me hanging out in the lobbies of state and federal houses, of legislative houses, House, Senate, whatever it may be. So we're hanging out in the lobby. COVID has obviously changed a lot of that, but some of the best conversations that I've ever had, I could say lobbying slash car parking lot, because you catch people getting into their cars, senators, representatives. Sometimes you can't get an appointment, so you grab them. But that's where the word lobbying comes from, hanging out in the lobby. The communication is selective. If I have somebody, and I can think of 100 people probably, where I will work with them on some issues, and on other issues I have to be very careful because they're on the opposing side. And so my communication with those people is very selective. At times it can become adversarial. I'm a very civil, calm person. When in doubt, pick up the guitar and strum a few chords and all the angst goes away. But it can become, for some people, very, very heated, because we're each hired and we each believe in our side's position. And so the next point, we don't like to lose, we like to win. I've never done a poll on it. I would imagine that there are a lot of ex-athletes in the lobbying profession where we were very competitive people when we were younger, and perhaps it just carries over into the job we do now. But there are some situations where we do have commonalities with these two, government relations versus lobbying, because there will be times where I will join with a force that maybe I normally wouldn't in order to defeat a measure. Building coalitions, there's an old phrase, politics makes strange bedfellows. And so you line up with people that you sometimes think you would never have a commonality with, but you do because of the particular item. And it's all because you're trying to reach the goal. The people I know that are registered lobbyists down at the state capitol, I like all of them as people. And there are times where I dislike their position. And thankfully, most every one of those folks, including the people that work for the city of Scottsdale, can separate the two. We can go have lunch, talk about our families, where we're going on vacation, and then the next day we're going to be opposing each other on a particular piece of legislation. So our state legislature, this is a little primer for you all. We have 30 districts in the state, 1 senator and 2 representatives per district. And they are divided equally by population. I'll talk a little bit about redistricting later on. So it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000 people per district. And they are all elected every 2 years versus the federal level. A senator has a 6-year term, and the congressperson has a 2-year term. Our senators and representatives are every 2 years, general election dates. So they're coming up. Session commences early to mid-January. The date floats around a little bit because it's in the Constitution about it starting the first Monday after the second Tuesday, something like that. But right around the 10th is usually when we start. We're supposed to go 100 days. I have 3 exclamation points there. We rarely make the 100-day mark. I recall maybe one of those in the last 20 years. And Governor Ducey's first year, we got done in 80 some days, but most of them are lengthy. We'll get to that in a second, how long this one went. Usually there's about 1,800 bills introduced and about 350 to 400 make it to the governor. We do read every single bill to see how it would possibly affect the city. And so if anybody out there in the world has insomnia, I'll invite you to join one of those parties. All bills have to go through a process. Now, I just said all bills, and I'm going to correct myself immediately. All bills that get assigned to a committee, because there are numerous bills that never get assigned to committees. As you saw, we have 1,800 introduced. We have 300 to 400 that get to the governor. That means the bulk of bills never see the light of day, or they fail somewhere along the way. But many, many bills never ever get a hearing. The process, if you haven't witnessed this directly, it's quite interesting. In early statehood, they established the position of a reader on the floor of the House and the Senate. And the reason for that is because we had many legislators that could not read. And so they used to literally read all bills. Now they still have the position of reader, but all the reader now does is the bill number and the short title or the topic area that it's going to. And because they have so many bills now, the 1,800, the reader literally speaks like an auctioneer. So Senate Bill 11, finance, and then the chair assigns it to a committee. So that first read, second read, policy committee. There are 12 to 15 policy committees in each chamber. Finance, health and human services, education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Bill passes that by majority, goes to the Rules Committee. Rules Committee is only supposed to address bills in relation to their constitutionality and are they in proper form. Now, in the Policy Committee, we can go in and testify. We can weigh in. I'm going to show you how to do that later on as citizens, that you can go in and look at bills. But that's the place where we can publicly make our positions known. Most of our work is not done in those committees. Most of our work is done before those committees. We see the bill, we go talk to our delegation, we tell them what we think about the bills. We receive in our department input from all the departments, the council, the mayor, in order to have an effective message once we get in there. The committee of the whole, so rules, proper form, constitutionality. Caucus, each party sits in a separate room and talks about the bills. Then it goes to committee of the whole, or COW. This is the big debate period of time on the floor. And this is where any committee amendments are formally adopted. Then they do a third read, official vote, and it's on the big board. You can see how everybody has made their decision. Then it goes to the other side, and we start all over again. Legislation is hard to get through. And in some ways, it should be hard. It shouldn't be easy, excuse me, to change legislation. And I'll give you an example from many years ago. Pardon me. I was working at the League and I was working on a bill on graffiti, simple measure, about restitution for equipment rental to abate graffiti. Makes sense. Right, I got to rent equipment to spray paint the wall that had the graffiti on it, and we caught the perpetrator. And restitution says that they got to help pay for things, but equipment rental wasn't in statute, so we had to get it in. It was one of the hardest things I ever worked on. It was incredible. Now, eventually, it passed all the way through, and it's a law, but it was very difficult for even a simple measure like that. So if there is an amendment in one side, but not the other side, then it's got to go back to the original side and they have to do a final read on it and eventually to the governor's office. Most bills need a simple majority, 31 in the House, 16 in the Senate, and then the governor's the one. If there's an emergency clause, you have to have 2/3. These are bills that go into effect immediately. Budget would be a good example, but they don't need 2/3. But otherwise, things, a few years ago, we passed a bill related to the opioid epidemic, and that was emergency clause. If you're going to affect something that citizens have passed on the ballot, then you need 3/4 of the majority of the legislature, and you have to further the purpose. Most recently, there was something related to one of the marijuana initiatives that would have required a 3/4 vote. Scottsdale is currently represented by 3 legislative districts, 23, 24, 28, but all that is going to change. We have redistricting. We have redistricting after every census. We have an independent redistricting commission in Arizona. We don't have a legislature draw the boundaries. This was a reaction to some issues that occurred 20, 30 years ago. So our new districts will be 3, 4, and 8. Essentially, you can think of 3 as east of the 101, 4 west of the 101, and then a little over the top up by Desert Ridge. And then the bottom piece, probably roughly 1/6 of the city, it will be an 8. So 3 will be Scottsdale, Fountain Hills, some tribal land, and then 4 will be Scottsdale, Phoenix, Paradise Valley, and then 8 will be Scottsdale and Tempe. The only thing the legislature is supposed to do is pass a budget. That is the only constitutional requirement that they have. It's also almost always the last thing that they do before they adjourn. There's a general appropriations bill, or the feed bill, which feeds state agencies, and then budget related bills, BURBs, which are attached to the feed bill by topic: environment, education, public safety, etc. This year we had a $5+ billion surplus, including $1.5 billion ongoing, and this year's budget is $18 billion, the highest budget of all time by a lot. Some of the key items that were in there: $1 billion to water augmentation, $60 million to the housing trust fund. There were big increases to education funding, and then also transportation infrastructure. So these are some bills that were very, very important to the city of Scottsdale. I mentioned the legislative agenda earlier, and this is what the citizens told the mayor and the council. The mayor and the council told us. And so we worked very hard on these issues, and I won't go into great detail on all of them, but I will talk about sort of how we do things. So first step in a bill is you find a legislator who has displayed in the past some friendliness towards you individually, some friendliness towards your city, or some knowledge of the issue itself. And it was important, Senator Shope on Senate Bill 1067, that we have a more efficient system of acquiring water financing. So that was the decision made to go to Mr. Shope. He lives in Coolidge, actually. So we find the original sponsor that we want. We get the bill assigned. We see the committee makeup. We then go and talk to every single committee member that we possibly can. We do employ a state contract lobbyist in Scottsdale. So he is very effective at reaching out to people that we can't maybe immediately get a hold of. So so much of the job is selling the bill as very beneficial to citizens or very harmful. It's usually one or the other. There are hundreds of bills that we never take a position on simply because they don't pertain to cities or towns. 1168 Senate bill. Oh, by the way, an SB is Senate bill. And if you see an HB later on, that's a House bill. And then all the Senate bills start with a 1, and all the House bills start with a 2. Vacation rentals, a big hot topic in the city of Scottsdale. We worked and worked and worked this bill. A lot of the work that we do is behind the scenes. We work with other stakeholders. We work with the industry. We work with neighborhood association, you name it. Whoever is invited to the table by the sponsor of the bill, we sit down and work it out. There must have been 30 or 40 iterations of Senate Bill 1168 before it finally passed and got to the governor. back and forth, late nights, reading, talking on the phone. And so the bill eventually became a compromise measure that the industry could live with, that we could live with. It's not to say that there aren't outstanding issues. There are. We've got another session coming next January, and we can work further on those. And Mr. Mesnard is a senator out of Chandler. Overnight use of fireworks prohibition. So fireworks came in legally in the state 10 or 12, 15 years ago. I don't remember now. But I'm a dog owner. My dog hates fireworks. Therefore, I have difficulty with them as well. His name is Cooper. He shivers. He is frightened. And so the earlier they stop, the better off it is for Cooper. I wish I had a picture of Cooper with me right now. But so that was another measure that we strongly supported. And then the last one, 1740, is a big picture item, water infrastructure, anything from conservation measures to finding new water sources, potentially even buying water from other places. There's been some talk of desalinization plants, if I said that correctly. This year we ran really long, 166 days, fifth longest ever. General effective date of bills, so any bill that didn't have an emergency clause or the budget, or something very specified, because we can have delayed effective dates as well, 2 or 3 of those a year. So September 24th. This period of time, it's 90 days, is so that citizens, if they find a measure offensive, they have the opportunity to gather enough signatures to refer that measure to the ballot. That has happened a handful of times in my memory. It could happen again this year. We'll see. It's a short window for signature gathering, quite frankly, because that's very hard. And those of us that live here in the Valley understand the difficulties about being outside this time of year for any length of time. All right, I'm going to shift gears here a little bit now and go out of the state venue and talk about the federal relations. So it's obviously greatly different because we don't live in Washington, D.C. or the surrounding area. So we do employ a contract lobbyist on a federal level. We also monitor through the National League of Cities measures that are important to cities and towns. We're a member of that organization. They're based in DC. So they will bring issues to us. Our federal contract lobbyists will bring issues to us. And a lot of it has to do with funding opportunities because there's just not enough money often within the state itself to tackle some of these big projects. And Scottsdale itself has pretty much reached its growth potential versus some of the other communities in this state. I think of where I used to work in Maricopa, which has hundreds and thousands of acres that they still can grow into. And so they have a lot of infrastructure needs that are different than what they are here in the city of Scottsdale. Nonetheless, we still have infrastructure needs. But we also look at things like federal policies related to the environment, for example. We are currently represented by 2 Congresspersons, Representative Schweikert and Representative Stanton. Redistricting drew the new congressional district, which will be Congressional District 1. They shift some boundaries, so it'll mostly look like 6, and we will no longer have the portion that Mr. Stanton is no longer going to be. If these 2 are reelected, let me put it this way, we will have Mr. Schweikert. We won't have a second congressperson. We have obviously 2 senators, Mark Kelly and Kristen Sinema. Mr. Kelly is up for re-election this year, and Ms. Sinema is up in 2024. Again, those are 6-year terms, whereas the representatives are 2-year terms. I mentioned our federal contract lobbyists. We also have some dialogue with federal agencies. It could be anybody from Department of Transportation to the Federal Aviation Administration. And again, it often is something that's driven by either citizen input or staff input to our department here. And then we do the outreach to the congressional offices, be it a senator's office or a representative's office. Sometimes it just takes a couple of phone calls, and then they will call the federal agency that is in charge of that particular issue, and we can get things resolved. And we don't have to go any kind of legislative route, which is most of the time preferable because it's hard to get, again, bills passed. I mentioned we look a lot at federal funding opportunities, the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, also known as the BIL, which I forget what that stands for right now, but it's something about infrastructure. So, well, bipartisan infrastructure law, there we go. Nobody said that to me, I just popped it in my head. We also do a lot of work regionally. So in strength, there are numbers. So when we are working on a project, on a bill, on whatever it may be, having more voices there. So we interact with a variety of different organizations and or entities. MAG is the Maricopa Association of Governments, so any governmental entity within Maricopa County, city, town, tribe, county. And then there are also business representatives within those committees of MAG. And MAG does most of the transportation planning for this county, environmental air quality items, human services, continuum care, domestic violence issues, all those sorts of things. We interact often with our tribal partners, anything from lobbying together on a certain issue or processing tribal gaming grants as a fiscal agent. So the tribe has some available gaming grant money, and nonprofits, we are sort of the funnel between the tribe and the eventual recipient. Arizona League of Cities and Towns, I mentioned early on that I worked there for a decade, a wonderful organization founded in 1937. All 91 cities and towns in the state of Arizona belong to the league. It's a membership organization. It's funded primarily by membership dues. And they are located right by the Capitol, within, I would say, 100, 150 yards of the House and the Senate and the governor's office. And their primary focus is legislative advocacy on behalf of cities and towns. There are about 25 cities and towns large enough to have departments like ours, government relations departments, but many of our communities out there in rural Arizona especially are too small to staff like that. Half the cities and towns in the state are below 10,000 in population. And so they rely on the league for their advocacy efforts. The league also contains some affiliate organizations, city managers, clerks, finance officers, and attorneys. Then lastly, we are members of the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association, AMWA. It's the cities here in the valley have direct water provision as one of their services. The reason I want to put this up here is that we have at least weekly, if not more, meetings with the other entities trying to advance our legislative agendas. As I said before, strength in numbers. Internally, what does this department do? We are the briefers. We brief on legislative activity, be it on a federal or state level, other interests that are of intergovernmental nature. So anywhere from the council, the mayor, the boards and commissions, I've spoken to a few of those now. We are within the city manager's office, but we also let our folks within our office know what's happening at the state capitol or the federal. The executive team, so anybody from the treasurer to the auditor, the water director, all those folks. And at the very start, I talked about the legislative agenda. input comes from these different sources. The legislative agenda itself is probably a little over 2 pages long, and it directs our department. So we get the input from everybody, and then we seek to implement those items. So there may be bills introduced that do not fall within the parameters of that. And we will have discussions if somebody brings it to us, and make decisions sort of on an individual basis whether or not that's a bill that we should act on or not. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here on some of the potential resources for you, and then I guess we will have some Q&A towards the end as well. We belong to the League of Cities and Towns, so they are a great resource for municipal issues. If you go to their website, not only will you find legislative items, but you'll also find model ordinances. Many of our staff here attend one of those affiliate type meetings, be it the budget and finance or the attorneys, those kind of places. And so they have a great bill monitoring system. They are just a wealth of information. And then the legislative website itself, which is azleg.gov. But that's the website, but it's called the Arizona Legislative Information Service, or ALICE. And you can track bills, you can see what's happening at the state capitol. And I'm going to point particularly to the request to speak system. So on the legislative website itself, you'll see a tab that says legislative information. And if you allow that to drop down, you'll see request to speak. That is where you can electronically register your opinion on a bill. There are a few of us that work for the city who are designated voices for the city. But as individual citizens, private citizens, people can weigh in as well. And the initial registration for that is down at the Capitol, unfortunately. You have to go to the House or the Senate, and there are 4 or 5 kiosks in each building where you can create an account. But from that point forward, you can do it from any internet connected computer, as long as you remember your password, that you have access to. And you might see a bill that has for, against, and neutral. And the for crowd is 250 people, and the against crowd is 500 people, and 1 neutral. I cannot guarantee you if that bill is going to fail or not. It really depends upon how much lobbying took place. And so electronic systems are great. The masses can definitely get involved, but nothing beats a face-to-face meeting. Nothing beats a phone call. In a distant third is an email. So I would, if you're interested in advocating for any kind of issue, I would implore you to get to know your legislators and speak to them as directly as you can. Actually, I would say second place is get to the staff people that work in the House, the Senate, and in Congress. You make good allies with those folks, they'll get the message to the elected official for you. Having an abundance of legislative staff allies is probably one of the greatest strengths that this department has. So now, if you have any other stuff that you're interested in, questions, what bills, this, that, and the other thing, that's my information right there, Dale Wiebusch, and my email and my direct line. And I think with that, I will conclude the semi-formal remarks and turn it over to Christy for any Q&A. Thank you so much.
Dale, that was just a great overview of what you do. And I felt almost like I was in Government 101 in college. It was a good review because I needed that. So thank you. It was a great presentation. We do have a couple of questions for you. And the first one is, to what extent, if at all, are Scottsdale positions with regard to state legislation or other public policy initiatives at odds with other Phoenix municipalities? Like, how do we jive with other Phoenix municipalities?
I would say 99% of the time we're on the same page. And if we're not on the same page, it's not diametric opposition, it's nuanced. I'll give you an example of a bill this year, Senate Bill 1333. It's about these autonomous little delivery vehicles. Neuro is the company. And we thought, well, I think we can live with that. And there were other cities that were like, no. And, you know, so then it was like tweak, 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 tweak. And then finally everybody was like, okay, we can live with that. But we were early on more comfortable than some other cities. So it's not a major rift. It's usually more of a subtle difference. It's rare that you're wrong. We don't do that. So we like each other too.
That's great. Thank you. So we have another question. It says, to what extent, if at all, are Scottsdale positions? Oh, let's see. I thought I got rid of that one. Hold on. All right, start over. Scottsdale's population is not growing as fast as other area municipalities. Does this pose any sort of threat for us?
So I spoke a little bit about, in terms of just land mass, we don't have that much available for development in comparison to some other places. You know, Buckeye is the fastest growing city in the country. Buckeye annexed a whole bunch of land over a decade ago. Their land mass is larger now than the city of Phoenix.
Wow.
However, where's the water is always the rub.
Yeah.
So now maybe they have adequate supplies. I don't know, but that's always a question of mine on those sort of massive development areas. However, the shared revenue system takes into account your population. So we have X dollars that comes in through the shared revenue system. And we would have to plummet in population to have serious damage to the shared revenue system. We're not going to plummet. The fact that we're not growing as fast financially is not as much of an issue, quite frankly. But it's a good question.
Good, thank you. Also, we have folks that are wondering how you find out about when the city, when we redistrict or when something is new, how do we hear about that? Like, what are the mechanisms for getting the word out to the public? So for instance, the redistricting.
Yeah, I was not, this is not an excuse, it's just fact. I was not working here when redistricting happened.
Okay.
So I can't really speak to that per se. I know what we did. And in Maricopa, and again, redistricting is an every 10-year process. And it's based on the census. So when the census is done and those numbers are ratified by the federal government, in Arizona, we then start the redistricting process. So you will not have to concern yourselves with redistricting until 2030.
Okay.
And we have an independent commission. There's 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats and 1 independent as chair. And those are selected by the highest ranking officer down at the Capitol in each party. And then those 4, the 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, pick the chair. And then you have map experts that they hire. I followed it very, very closely back when I was in Maricopa. It's a tremendous process. And they craft, so you have to account for some population growth. And so congressional districts have to be 740 some thousand, and then state ones 200 some thousand. So you tweak boundaries around to match those up. I would be more than happy to install some kind of a, and again, I just can't speak to how it was done here because I wasn't here physically, but I can certainly make that much more of a public accommodating system.
Like work with our communications people and get that out. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. And so this kind of falls along the same lines. How do our residents learn about the new legislative representatives and Senate people that they'll be voting for?
Bad joke first. Campaign signs. I worked on many years. I worked when I was at the league on campaign sign legislation, and the period of time in which they are up is longer, but we're able to fight for public safety issues. So if a sign is impeding traffic, we do have the ability to remove those signs. We also got them to put contact information on those signs. That's an aside, but we can't, well, actually we've had, on a council level, we've had, I believe, 3 candidate forums for city council now that have been here in the city. One was actually here in City Hall, and then there's been 2 others. I think those are sponsored actually by news publications, local news publications. In terms of the other candidates, it's very difficult for a nonpartisan city. There's only one partisan city in the state. All other city and town elections are conducted on a nonpartisan level. And the only partisan city election is Tucson. So it's very difficult for us to publish information without some kind of shadow of partisanship. But in terms of just who is out there, I know we made available to the council and the mayor the listing of everybody who had filed initially. But now we're also in this area of where there's people that have either decided not to run or their signatures were challenged. They didn't have enough signatures. But I mean, this is something I can talk over with other folks here in the city and see if there is some kind of mechanism we can use. Again, if it's through the communication department and these are the people and this is where generally. And then there is a tool, I don't know if they've caught it up to speed yet, on the legislative website, where you could type in your address and find what new legislative district you're in. I don't know if they've put that on yet because of the redistricting. I would have to go take a look. So I hope that somewhat answers the question, but I'm highly interested in exploring a way to get more information out to citizens.
Great, thank you.
Without being partisan.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question. You mentioned, you know, water earlier with in relation to another city and all the land they have annexed, but where's the water? And so I think that stimulated a question. And so we're asking, what is the direction and dynamics of future initiatives relating to water allocation policies and the ongoing drought? Anything on your docket?
I can speak at a high level on this. I'm not the minutia water expert by any stretch of the imagination, but we live in a state that is 75 to 80% desert. We have 5 active management areas for water. We're in one of them. Most of the space in the state is not actively managed, which means there's no documentation of where the wells are dug, for example, how much water somebody's drawing out of their well. But here in an active management area, all that stuff is accounted for. So we have Colorado River water, we have Salt River project water, we have groundwater, we have reclaimed water. And we manage our water here in Scottsdale expertly. We are going to see some cutbacks from the Colorado. And we are in active discussions with other members of the Municipal Water Users Association, Department of Water Resources. This new bill that was just passed, 1740, is going to look at how can we find other sources of water, perhaps from outside of the state. One of the interesting things that I found, and I lived in Minnesota for a long time, and then I came down here about 25 years ago. And to talk about two different climates, not just the cold, but the wet. You know, I have friends up there right now who are battling flooding because of the excessive rain. And so when I was in college, there was talk about building a pipeline from Lake Superior down to Arizona to send water. And there's some talk about building a pipeline from the Mississippi over and dumping it in the reservoirs in Colorado, and then they would leak out enough to keep the river active. There's talk about a desal plant down in the Sea of Cortez. But I guess my general point is one of the things that Arizonans have done for 110 years is figure it out. There's a problem, find a solution, and be dogged in that pursuit. And that's what I find Arizona successful at.
And Dale, just for your knowledge and those in the audience that were unaware, we did have a class earlier in the season called WaterWise, and it speaks to a lot of these things that you were mentioning. So I would urge anyone that has questions about water, concerns about legislation with water, to go to that 360 page that we have. And we have everything archived from that presentation. There's PowerPoints and the video and the Q&A. So go there and you'll find out more.
Great.
And I think we have one more question. And I am working to understand it, but this person is saying most of the people in Scottsdale are governed by HOAs in their communities. And so they're wondering if you'll go to bat for HOAs in the legislature with regard to legislation that is deemed to be supportive for HOAs rather than harmful. Are we able to do that?
I don't know. My first guess is to talk to the city attorney that I'm aligned with. and
yeah.
I really don't have an answer for that, and I'm not trying to be evasive. I just don't know.
Yeah, and Bruce, I know you're here. I would be happy if you stepped in if you had anything that could respond to that, because I know you're our HOA expert. Are you here and can you do so, or?
Yes, I am here. I don't know if I can really respond to too much.
Okay.
I do know that an HOA is a private contract between the citizens who are buying into that area and the homeowners association that governs it or runs it. And therefore the city really doesn't have a big role in that. And I can't imagine the city being too involved in lobbying for it. That's just my 2 cents. And I'm not an attorney. I don't play one on TV. But
you do quite a bit of neighborhood college work with HOA lawyers and such, and so you're a pretty good person to go to. So I would feel pretty comfortable with your response.
Okay, well, thank you.
All right, and thank you for jumping in impromptu. We appreciate it, both Dale and I, for sure. And with that, I think we're done with our questions, and I want to thank you all for taking your time today to attend. It was just valuable, wonderful information. Dale, thank you I know you're a busy guy, taking time to share with our group and with our residents. It was wonderful. And to the class, I want to invite you to attend next in 2 weeks on the 21st, a class that is about practicing preparedness. This class covers emergency management, on many levels, from municipalities to your personal home. And Troy Ludwig will meet with us and talk with us. And I think it's a real critical topic and really should be one that you should try to attend. And if you can, then go ahead and register on our 360 webpage, and we'll see you on the 21st. So with that, take care and stay cool, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.